Welcome back to Top Shelf EDU. I'm your host, Aaron Lee. Today, I'm joined by Travis Westlake, the Regional Director for the University of Bristol. Welcome, Travis.
Hey, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate you for having me tonight or today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. For students and families who may not be too familiar with Bristol, how would you describe the university and what makes it stand out compared to other institutions?
Yeah, so for me, this is always a fun conversation because I get to work with students from around the globe, but most often in Canada to the US. And it's always trying to compare, like, what is something familiar that they'll know, that they've experienced. And I do find that Bristol is a mid-sized to large city in southwest England, 90 minutes from London. So that's kind of the starting point from geography. And the city itself, it's very creative, artsy, yet compact and walkable. So when students are used to a North American city, we have to drive everywhere. That's not the case with Bristol. Is that you can, 20 minutes you can get to all these major destinations, but it's quite a hub. And Bristol's a city. We were lucky that recently we were named the coolest city in the UK. So if somebody wants that independent, somewhat bohemian, maybe hipster vibe, I guess, to your experience, while having the backdrop of some beautiful historic buildings, and then famous artists like Banksy calls Bristol home. It's really just a beautiful, cool, vibey spot for students to study, while not being in the biggest city in the UK, but being in a large enough city that you have everything to access. So I think it makes it a fun, exciting place for students to study.
Okay. Now, how would you describe the culture, like the academic culture and the student experience at Bristol, and what types of students would tend to thrive?
Yeah, and so when it comes to the UK, sometimes we throw around different classifications of institutions, and one of them is Russell Group. And I think Russell Group trips people up if they're not from the UK themselves, because it speaks to research intensive universities, typically your highest ranked ones, but not always. But Bristol's fortunate that we do find ourselves in this special group that we're a top 10 UK university, and we've got 44 subjects that are in the top 100 in the world. So the academic quality and the type of student, you do have to be a dedicated student that is high performing. That you have to be somebody that likes to do academic work, to be quite frank, to be successful and to enjoy your time there. It is a research-led university, so that means you are going to work with professors who are doing cutting edge, brand new stuff in their industry or their space. And then whether it's Bristol or elsewhere in the UK, I found what's different from a place like North America is the focus when it comes to studies. So where the model in other places in the world, you can major minor, you can have a very flexible first year to figure out what are you passionate about, what do you really enjoy to study. The UK, you're really only studying your one subject. So for students that know they want to be lawyers, it's great because you can do that directly from high school. Same for medicine, directly from high school. But even something like geography, which we're very well known for, is it's 3 years of geography that you're studying. So that focus, I think, for the student that is passionate, that knows what they want to do, is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But for other students, if you're kind of lost and trying to figure it out, sometimes that's a limitation of going to England, is because just how much it requires or asks for you. So generally, very passionate, motivated students would do well at a university like Bristol.
Okay, that's a great insight because it kind of moves me into my next round of questions in terms of programs. You listed a few, but can you provide an overview of what programs, either the most popular or even unique ones that you offer? And is there any flexibility to explore courses outside of those chosen programs?
Yeah, so in general, what I find popular, we have over 600 programs. So it's kind of like, well, there's a lot to sort through. For when I'm working with students from North America, I do find the ones that pop up are typically more professional programs in nature because you can access it directly from high school. So for law, we're top 10 in the UK. We have a really interesting 5-year law degree that is a dual law degree. So it's 3 years at Bristol and then 2 years at Western University in London, Ontario. And students get both the UK law degree and then they get a Canadian JD. So that's a really special, unique one that we have. Veterinary sciences, we are one of, I believe, 6 UK institutions that have the North American accreditation. So a student directly from high school can go to the UK for 5 years, They come back to Canada or the US, and then they take the exact same accrediting exam to become a veterinarian. So that one's just from an access perspective is really exciting for students. Medical sciences is quite popular. And then recently we were named the AI University of the Year. Part of that is because we have the fastest supercomputer in the UK on our campus. So actually, like in our facilities, we've got the fastest UK supercomputer. So there's different ways where we combine. There's a program for health in AI or business in AI, and you can just see the different ways that we can work with it in education. I would say Bristol's on the leading edge of that. So if it's engineering, computer science, anything really technology related, that is an area where students, I would say, seek out Bristol, and that's something they look for. For the student that is not quite certain what they want to do, or maybe they want to explore a little bit, we do offer I would call it a more traditional liberal arts degree where students can mix and match. So it's most appropriate for somebody who's a passion for humanities. So whether that's languages or history or English or philosophy, there are different ways to combine those subject areas to have a bit of choice or more electives in your studies. You're not restricted to that only one thing. And then finally, the one that I think Bristol stands out for, and for listeners that aren't aware, the UK typically they're 3-year degrees where you can do an integrated master's. So in 4 years, your undergrad plus a 1-year master's. My favorite is the Masters of Innovation because students can mix it with, there's about 14, 15 different undergrad programs you can choose from. So you could go engineering for 3 years, add a 1-year Masters of Innovation, but you could also be in history or music. So it's not the same as like a major minor, but it's to take your regular discipline that you're studying and just find other ways of using that knowledge of how do I apply this in a real world setting? How do I solve problems and challenges that's happening in the real world from that disciplinary lens? But then you get to work with students in other subject areas. So that engineering or that biology or chemistry student, they're going to work with that history or that business student to create new products, to fix problems that they're experiencing their day to day. And the outcome of that is you walk away with that undergrad degree plus a 1-year master's in innovation. So it's a pretty unique and cool program that we offer.
Yeah, that is unique, and thank you for all that information. I was aware of the 3-year degree programs, and, when I work with students, that's one of the big reasons why they wanna go over there is because they know exactly what they wanna study, and they dive right into those subjects right away, rather than taking the 1 or 2 years of the general classes, especially for, like you said, with law or medicine, and we'll get more into that a little bit later if we can. Can you describe the teaching styles that students should expect when they attend Bristol? Is it lectures? Is it tutorials? Is there opportunities for experiential learning, whether it's co-op internships or if they study abroad? Can you describe those for a little bit?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for students, if they're coming from different education systems, so if they're in Canada, they're in the US, there's going to be a lot of similarities, but sometimes the language around it is different. I think that's what trips students up. So even something like co-op, that's not in the lingo in the UK, but they may call it a year in industry. So you may do year one, year two, then you'll take a complete year off from university, have the year in industry. And then if you're in the US, well, you're thinking, well, that sounds like a lot like internship. So a lot of these things they are similar, but we're just using different language to describe them. So there are a lot of program options where that comes up that you take a break of your studies, work for a full year paid, and then come back and finish your degree in that final year. So I find that's becoming increasingly popular with students. For study abroad, there's similarities that students can leave Bristol for a year, go study somewhere else in the world, and where I think we're quite fortunate because of the academic standing of the university, the partnerships that we maintain and carry globally, they're some of the best universities in the world. So to go study, whether that's say in Hong Kong, whether that's in Brazil, or I was chatting with a colleague from Argentina last week. We have students that sometimes it's come to Bristol, but then they want to do a year in the US and they go to Berkeley or they go to other University of California schools. So the doors that kind of open for you when you're at that certain level of institution, it's quite impressive what's available for them. For other, I would say, teaching methods and expectations for students, the UK as a whole, the assessment is different than North America. A lot of times for a class, you may have 2 or 3 major assessments that make up your final grade for a class, as opposed to my undergraduate experience was you'd take one test that was worth 20%, you would have a group project that was 15%, and you're doing 7, 8, 9 things that kind of add up to 100% at the end of the year. Where the UK is, it does sound a bit more high stakes. You can have a midterm at 50% and then a final at 50%. I do find for students, once they've gotten used to that system, is they actually find it quite freeing, that the level of independence. You do have to obviously go to class, and like, there is that expectation to be there. But outside of class, to keep on top of your read-ins and what's expected with your read-ins, is you do have that flexibility, and you do. It's more self-guided and more independent than I would say a Canadian university or an American university. But I'd say, regardless of discipline, the ability to read, research, and write well will be consistent across the disciplines. The type of hands on learning or career relevant experiences you'll receive is just going to vary by the subject area. Bristol does maintain something called the Professional Liaison Network. And these are just ways that we are ensuring that our students get to either work in class projects with employers or have opportunities like a co-op or like an internship for them, so that when they want that experience outside of the classroom, they're well positioned. And right now, I believe we're fifth or sixth in the UK for employability. And so it's something that we know when our students do leave the university that they're well prepared to make that transition. But I think a lot of that does start on campus, whether that is extracurriculars or clubs or societies, or some of those maybe paid experiences that our students are taking up.
Yeah, and those paid experiences would, for those students that may be a little bit concerned about the dollar or the tuition, the cost, that's an excellent way to help pay for your education. And even if it doesn't go towards tuition, it can help fund some of your extracurriculars and what you do outside of the classroom as well.
Yeah, certainly. Whether it's a concert, whether you just want to go out with your friends, and if you're a British citizen, it's a bit different. If you're an international student, there's limitations, but I find the part-time work that students do, I'm always kind of surprised that I've met students that they're brand new to the UK and they're a month there, 2 months there, and they are working part-time. So usually advise students that first year, take it slow, transition, make sure you're on top of your studies, but to pick up either a position that's related to your field, whether working in a research lab, working on campus, or even things like working in coffee shops, there are transferable skills, and making that British pound to have some fun money isn't the worst thing. To be able to get the full experience, or to have a few dollars to go, hop on a flight and travel to Spain for the weekend. I think that's one of the big benefits is that, yeah, fitting in a little bit of work while you're there, or taking that full year of professional work, not just helps tuition, but it ensures you can have fun while you're studying too.
Yeah, and most importantly, it's gonna build those skills and those connections for you. So whether you're going on to grad school or whether you're, going out right into the career afterwards into the workforce, you're able to talk about those experiences. You have those skills that are really gonna set you apart from other students who may have just went there and just studied, right?
What's something that I had conversations with faculty yesterday around the nervousness students are having about, jobs disappearing to AI, and some of those technical skills of whether it's coding or whether it's just administrative work in an office that we don't need to do anymore. And what are we looking for a university graduate now? And overwhelmingly, it is those transferable skills. Some people call them soft skills or power skills. I've heard as a term now. But it is something that again and again from every discipline we hear that they're looking for strong communicators, folks that know how to build and develop relationships or work in teams. So you can study a subject like history or geography, and yes, there are technical skills you learn in any subject, but it is those transferable skills that I think really helps a student thrive after university.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that because when we're working with students too, we're always talking about, you need to future proof yourself. And it's all about skills. It's, we can say you want to become this, you want to do this, but ultimately it's the skills that are going to help you be successful and find those opportunities. So thank you for that. As you talked about the employability after, and it's really important when students are considering institutions and where they might go and what they might study. What career services are available to students who attend Bristol, and how do the relationships with either employers or alumni come in to help those students?
Yeah, and the first thing I always tell students, particularly with the UK, being only a 3-year degree, is to start these things early, because the time goes by in a flash, and you could be in third year just finishing up, and then starting to think about it. That sometimes that's a little bit too late. So Bristol, like most universities, we have quite robust career services. So whether that be on-campus positions, mock interviews, resume workshops. We do have an additional extracurricular program where it's called the Bristol Plus program. So all of those things that you do outside of the classroom, whether that be volunteering to work at an open house, or that is a part-time position, or it's clubs and societies you've participated in. The Plus Award it's a small monetary value, but really it's a way for us to recognize that work that you've done. I've seen in other systems that sometimes they call this a co-curricular record, that it's almost like a transcript to your transcript, but I think it's just the goal is to help students be able to communicate that here's the things that I've done that are maybe non-academic, but are helpful skills and ways that I can now practice or articulate those things. So that is alongside of all those other career services that we do. There is the Bristol Plus program. So for many students that maybe listen to this, I imagine some of them will be considered international students if they're going to the UK and they're not British themselves. So we actually do maintain a full job board just for international students looking for opportunities, which is quite unique that there are employers that either have a history or are more open or willing to bring on a student after graduating if they're non-British students. So that is just a resource that's built in for it. And then finally, Bristol's actually taken a really interesting approach in recognizing that we are a global university, that we're fortunate to have students from all around the world, is the relationships and partnerships we build. So whether that be in a place like China or a place like India or a place like Canada, the US, is that our faculty remain connected. In some places, we actually maintain our own industry partnerships. So the intention is that when a Bristol student graduates and say they move to Vancouver or they move to San Francisco, that we want them to be their degree to be known, to be recognized. We want them to meet alumni that have had similar experiences, just to understand where they're coming from and what they've done with their education. So the goal is to ensure they have that global mobility, and it's a really fun thing for me in my role, because I was at an alumni event last night, and at this event I met somebody who was an actuary, there was a lawyer, there was a journalist who worked for Sky News, there was somebody who was opening up a art trail in Toronto and was the executive director of this art trail, and then we mixed it in with some of our current students, and I think it was great for the students to see in this case that they could be from Toronto, they could study at Bristol and come back and be part of this really thriving, strong alumni network. So I find it's really special that it doesn't really matter what you're interested in, that there are those different worlds and different lives and different stories, that we try our best to make sure students are exposed to it early in their education.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. And as we all know, it's really important. I don't want to say it's more about who you know, but it really helps. Absolutely.
Yeah, in some cases, just somebody, vouching for you, or maybe that little nudge or words of encouragement that I think a lot of alumni, they love to mentor students. So it's not, yeah, that is still true. The who you know never hurts. But sometimes it's just a nudge in the right direction. And I think an alum is more willing to stick their neck out for you to help you along the way, which makes a big difference for our students.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to move into admissions a little bit. Can you walk us through the undergraduate admissions process for Bristol? And outside of the grades, one thing that most students may not know is that you actually go on predicted grades, correct?
Yes, and this will always vary by a student's home curriculum. So some students stress out about this because they'll read into the British language of the curriculum, which is A levels. So it throws a lot of students off, and then not everybody's doing predicted grades, which makes it a bit of a headache. So generally, I find if you are in for most education systems, we have the knowledge that we can share with the student that these are the specific units you have to do. If you're in a system that doesn't do predicted grades, so if somebody based in Ontario, our students do not do predicted grades in the Ontario Secondary School Diploma. That doesn't mean that they can't be considered. It is role and admission. So when a student applies to Bristol, we will review what grades are present and available. And then if it is a subject requirement or if there's a prerequisite for any specific course, so if you're applying to chemistry, you're going to need chemistry at the grade 12 level, or an IB, or whatever curriculum you're doing. So I think sometimes that can hold up a student, that maybe they're not taking that subject requirement until term 2 of their school if they are a semester at school. So it does trip students up a little bit when they hear about the different admission requirements. Students that are doing IB, the International Baccalaureate, it transfers quite well because everybody is familiar and knows that curriculum. But say a student's come from British Columbia, they're not at a disadvantage if they have the BC high school diploma. It's just whether they receive an offer from Bristol in December or January of their grade 12 year, or we may sometimes have to wait a little bit longer, maybe when they have their midterm grades of that final term two. In many spaces, I find it's quite similar to applying to a Canadian university. Um, our expectations of students and our admissions process are very similar in terms of timelines. So we're fortunate we have a centralized system, UCAS, that students will apply to 5 options through there. If they are applying to medicine or veterinary sciences or dentistry, they only get 4 options, but otherwise 5 options. When those applications come through, there is a personal statement component, but it's one personal statement for all of their university choices. So they don't have to write a statement for every single school they're applying to. And in most cases, we're primarily looking at their grades. It's quite transparent in that sense that I find, unlike the American system, which often requires students to do a lot of extra steps in terms of essays and personal statements and reference letters. The UK, it's like, for the most part, we want to see if you have the academic qualifications. Then there are some exceptions to that. Something like veterinary science has a supplementary requirement. Law has an extra exam. Medicine has an extra exam. But usually, strong grades in the right high school courses, that's sufficient. And then in the UK, it's a conditional offers. We do need you to finish grade 12 and maintain a minimum grade level. So sometimes that trips students up that maybe they have a high 80 or a low 90. They receive their offer to Bristol, they're all excited, and then they see it's conditional and they get a little scared, a little worried. It's just we need you to finish out grade 12 at the same or similar academic record to maintain your offer of admission. But acceptance timelines, if you're looking at a Canadian university at the same time, expect that your timelines are actually going to be quite similar to like a University of British Columbia or University of Toronto. Not identical, but very, very close in terms of what a student should expect.
Yeah. And one of the things I really appreciate when students apply through UCAS is, having only the 5 choices outside of your medicine, because it really forces them to do their research and to have a balanced list, which, when I work with students, it's kind of, all right, here's our list. And, let's make sure we have some, a reach school, some matches, and maybe one a likely. And thank you for clarifying in terms of you're mostly looking at grades. When does the personal statement and the recommendation letter from a counselor or a teacher, when do they come into play? And do they come into play more in a med or law application? And is there anything else? Like, I know in med there's an interview as well. Can you kind of just touch on, which one plays more important part throughout that process?
Yeah, I do find so. I certainly agree. I love that students with only 5 options, they do have to do a lot of consideration. They have to think about where they're applying before they submit these applications, compared to, not to pick on a system, but the US system. It's a wild west. The students can apply as many places as they want, which I don't think helps anybody really decide. But you even see sometimes students will ask us like, "Oh, what is your admit rate? Like, how many people do you give offers to?" And then I have to step back a little bit. Like, no, like we're quite transparent. Like, if you have the grades, you should be actively considered. You should have a reasonable chance. And there's always going to be changes in admissions. That sometimes you get more applications than you're expecting, and then maybe less offers go out for a specific course or program. But it's fascinating to me. And like, we don't celebrate low offer rates in the UK. Same as Canada. We don't really celebrate a low offer rate because we know our students are limited. They only get to apply to 5 places or 4 in the space for medicine. When it comes to the personal statement or the reference letter, I think for every institution, it's going to vary a little bit how much they weight it. For all of Bristol's programs, students can actually see a full admission statement on the weighting, how much is based off your high school grades versus personal statement. The one challenge I always warn students is that, again, we're using UK language. So sometimes we're talking about A levels and O levels, which means nothing to a Canadian in most cases. But generally, students need to know it's mostly their grades. I would say UCAS personal statement, to be mindful that that one statement is going to 5 different universities. So we know it's not about us. We know it's hopefully Hopefully you have some clarity of the subject area you want to study, so you can actually reflect and say, oh, I'm really passionate about geography and this is why I want to study geography. But there's cases where students apply for economics at one university, then politics at a different university, philosophy at a different one. So the personal statement isn't always going to be the most useful or true reflection of why Bristol's the best fit for you. And we know that. With the reference letter too, we know counselors are asked quite a bit for these. So it can vary. Quality or experience for counselors writing reference letters isn't always equal, where some schools students are really well prepared and coached and counselors are trained. Other schools, you don't have the same resources available. So usually find the academic transcript is the best resource for us in admissions. Where it comes into play, I would say if a student is on the fringe or if there are extenuating circumstances that we need to know about, sometimes something's happened in grade 12 that maybe limited a student's academic performance. These are really good spaces to flag those things for us. So when we do read them, we can see that. But in most cases, our primary focus or weight is on the transcript for Bristol. But always, if you're applying to other UK universities, check of what their processing guidance is, because it's going to vary a lot university to university. When it comes to some of the other requirements a student can expect, and hopefully I'm always guilty of like going into too much detail, but to keep it brief for folks, your law, your veterinary, your medicine, your dentistry, if it is something, medicine and dentistry has a standardized test. It is called the UCAT. I always compare it to some of the systems we have here for grad school, but the UCAT is actually a very useful tool for students, because if you're applying for medicine, usually students do want to apply everywhere to give themselves the best opportunity, best chance. But your UCAT score can actually be a filtering tool for you, because that will give you a sense of, like, take Bristol, for example. We will tell you what our historical UCAT cutoff is. And if you are at it or above it, or maybe just a little bit below it, yes, continue to consider Bristol. But if your UCAT score is greatly below our historical cutoff, don't apply to Bristol. And I'm not supposed to say that. It's my job to tell you, encourage you to apply to Bristol. But it's that it is one of the initial filtering tools and admissions that we will look at your UCAT and make a decision based off that. So if you're well below historical, save one of those precious 4 spaces to another university, is usually advice I provide students. Generally for medical admissions, it's going to vary slightly school to school. The simplest way to look at it is that there's 3 things. It's your high school grades, and that could be stage 1, your UCAT score, stage 2, and then some form of interview. Typically, they are mini interviews at British universities, which means either it's going to be a panel interview done by video, or sometimes universities will have, think of circuit training where you move between stations. It's kind of like that, where you'll move between interviewers. And this is designed to your benefit, because it means that if you answer one question really poorly with one interviewer, but then you shift to the next one, you answer that next question really well, nobody's really going to sync you or make you succeed based off one interview question. So the multi-minute interview, it hopefully controls bias. It hopefully controls any differences between interviewers. So it does sound intimidating when you hear I've got a full panel interview, or I have to go through this like circuit training of stations, but it's actually to your benefit. So again, for medicine, dentistry, think of those 3 things: grades, UCAT, and then the interview stage. Now, when it comes to something like law, not every university, but typically your more prestigious or more well-recognized law schools use something called the LNAT. It is essentially the British LSAT, is the easy way to think of it. Please do not be intimidated by it. It is an exam that you will complete and you'll get a score from it. I believe there's currently 9 law schools in the UK that require it, with varied deadlines. So some schools early as mid-October. University of Bristol, we give you a bit more flexibility that you can provide it up until about middle to end of January. And then there's a lot of UK law schools that don't require it. So if that's something that really concerns you, then you could look to the schools, don't even look for the test. But it is one of those things, we receive a lot of applicants to our law program. So the LNAT is a tool for us and a tool for others to help understand fit for student. And it's to hopefully your benefit, because if you do very well on it, then maybe you have the characteristics to be a successful lawyer. If you don't do as well as you hope, maybe that's a moment of reflection. And it's not to say you can't be a lawyer, but sometimes redirection is a healthy thing to help point you in a direction that fits your strengths. And I'm somebody that wrote the LSAT, and redirection was a good thing for me. Veterinary science, because it's so popular, I'll share, we do a supplementary applicant questionnaire. So it's a written questionnaire. Some universities do in-person interviews. Some universities do video interviews, but really it is just to understand, not do you have experiences of working alongside a vet or working on a farm or in a small vet hospital. More, do you have the characteristics and the values to be a vet? Do you understand what is required to be a vet? And it is a three-part questionnaire that students fill in as part of their application. There's some other exceptions when it comes to UK admissions of other tests out there, math tests and things of that nature. But for Bristol, those are the main ones to be aware of.
Yeah, that was very in depth. Thank you. And just to go on those interviews, if a student is lucky enough to be interviewed, what types of questions should they expect? Or like, what are, the tutors are you looking for in their answers? Are you looking for their experiences? Are you looking for their knowledge? Are you looking for their communication? Kind of, just briefly, what would help students prepare?
Yeah, so the one thing I have to share is technically, well, we don't release the questions. I'm not supposed to tell people what the questions are. The questions change. But in terms of, I think, preparing and practicing for it, students always do research online. It's like, what have other students experienced? And I think the interviewers, there is a genuine understanding that if you are 17 and applying for medical school, you're going to have limited experiences in some spaces. So we don't expect that you've worked in medical offices or so the life experience expectation is that you could have had a part-time job working at McDonald's. And there's things about working in a team or communication or leadership or just being able to display empathy and understanding people that you can get those experiences in everyday life. It could have been in class projects. Some reasons about like what are your motivations or intentions to work in this field, that you're not going into medicine just for the money kind of thing, that you have to want it for the right reasons. So usually I encourage students, there's a lot of just general interview techniques, the same interview techniques you'd use for a job interview that can apply to these sorts of interviews. And then for the questions, while we don't really release the actual questions, I think there's students can do some quick Google and try to figure out what are the types of things I should practice. But something even like there's the STAR method, and I can never remember the acronym for the STAR method, but it's like situation, task, action, result, or something along those lines. And I think these are just like quick little things to help students. How can I be concise, but how can I communicate? Whether it was a problem I solved in the workplace or at school. So usually it's the same as any job interview preparation is knowing how to pull past experiences that are relevant to the question you're being asked and how to display that in an articulate and concise way. So don't go work in a doctor's office because you think that's the way in the med school, is that you can have other life experiences is an important thing.
No, that's really important. Thank you for that. Um, last one, it's not about admissions, but if students are considering going there or if they're admitted, are there any scholarships or award or financial aid opportunities, especially for international students while they attend?
Yes, yeah, and we're quite fortunate to have a rather robust program, and there's a few options for students. So our program is called Think Big. We try to make it as straightforward as possible for students, where it's one application for the entire scholarship pool. So you don't have to chase different awards. Is you just fill out the Think Big application, and then you're considered for everything. And this ranges from, in some cases, small awards of £3,500. In other cases, awards up £26,000, which in some cases that's your full tuition. It's something that does renew for students, so it's not just first year, it's first, second, third year, or all the way through your studies would be available to you. And it's the questions that we ask in the scholarship that they can change, so they may change by next year, but it's actually very similar to the UCAS questions. So I think students will be familiar with what they're being asked. It's really like, why do you want to study this subject, and what have you done to help prepare you for this subject, are kind of the core questions that are being asked in this. But this past year, I believe it was £5 million that this award program provided students, and that's only international students that this award program for. So it's quite large. Beyond that, when it comes to planning and funding of your education, is dependent on where you're from. Sometimes you can access provincial or national loan structures. So if somebody's a BC resident, Ontario resident, we actually do participate in their award programs. US residents, we participate with FAFSA. So students can access US loans if they're on stateside. So even though you're going abroad, sometimes you can actually still access the home funding, depending on where you're from and what experiences you have. There are only a few external awards. So Usually the big external awards that students know or hear about, typically that's at the postgrad level, so master's and PhD. But sometimes we're able to locate even $1,000 here, $1,000 there with external scholarships can go a long way for students. And then usually the last thing I recommend students, once you've exhausted all options, sure, then look towards private loans through banks. But students and families just really need to be aware of like interest rates and the impact of the interest rate, what that's going to cost you long term. So sure, the UK is only 3 years. That's 1 year less of tuition, but with the currency rate, with interest rate on a loan, I always try to advise students is like, please really map things out before you commit to that, because the interest rates can vary, and it can be quite a lot if you're not careful. So usually it's personal savings, scholarships, maybe part-time work while you're there, and then the last thing a student should look to is private loans through the major banks.
Okay. Yeah, and that's one of the things that we always talk to students as well is make sure you have that conversation with your parents or families to make sure that before you start applying, that you can actually fund it. So that's really good to make sure that you have those conversations. We're going to move into student life a little bit, if that's okay. Can you describe the student life at Bristol? You know, the types of clubs, societies, extracurriculars that students can get involved in, and are there any unique traditions or experiences that they would experience when they get there?
Yeah, so we are the type of university I find that typically, like a residential university, where students move to the university. So there's all sorts of different models where you can have commuter campuses where students are busing or training in every day. You can have universities that are quite isolated or maybe in smaller communities, or are standalone campuses that are kind of closed off. For us, we are a city campus in a large city, but then our students generally live there. And what that results in is a very vibrant, busy space for students, in the most positive way. And it's great that like there's always something going on, something to do, whether it's run by the university and it's a university sanctioned event, or if it's just in our city. So even something like in the summer, Glastonbury, one of the major music festivals, is only 30-40 minutes away from Bristol. Or we're known for a hot air balloon festival in Bristol, in every summer. So there's just something always going on for our students that they're never really bored in that sense. And I think I mentioned earlier that travel in the UK is quite easy to get a cheap flight to go really anywhere in Europe is the norm for students. So you never really run out of things to do when it comes to clubs and societies on campus. There's over 300. So, of a university of our size, because we're over 30,000 students, it's difficult to not find your unique hobby or interest or thing that you want to do. The specific clubs, they do sometimes vary year to year, because in a lot of ways, if a club doesn't exist, a student can create it if they can have enough people sign up for it. So this is where like some things are really popular now, like F1 is obviously really popular, but if I said F1 10 years ago, maybe that was a new club to the university, but now that's something that students are very interested in. We do have a North American society that runs its own events for students. So I find that's a nice way for students when they want to be connected with a specific region of the world, they can. And we do celebrate basically every cultural event or festival is celebrated through our global lounge. And there is a rule that any of the cultural events that we host, so something like Lunar New Year, it's open to all students. So you don't have to be from that place to participate. So it's always this interesting group. Even the North American, they have American Thanksgiving, but you'll see students from other parts of the world. They're like, "What is American Thanksgiving? Like, why are people so excited about it? It's such a big deal." But obviously, for an American student, it's important to them. And then you've got students from other parts of the world that get to participate and enjoy that culture too and celebrate that culture. The UK is a bit unique that on Wednesdays, universities, I don't want to say shut down, but in some respect, students don't have academic work on Wednesday evenings. So it's club time. So it's just dedicated space and time held for clubs and societies. And so I want to say that's where it's really encouraged for students, because you can't use the excuse that I have to go to class, because everyone knows you don't have class. So it's pretty easy to plug into the different activities or sports teams and things like that. For athletics, the athletic culture in the UK, it's alive and vibrant and well, but it's not like the US. It's much more like the Canadian, where it's more recreational, and then there are competitive athletics. We are, as a city, I would say we're recognized and known for our rugby. That's our strength, and that's usually when folks are watching athletics in Bristol. While we have depends if you want to say football or soccer. While we do have, we're in the second division in the UK, we're not in the Prem. It's our rugby that does very well in the southwest of England. So for any rugby fans, some of the best rugby in the world is going to be in Bristol, both men's and women's teams. So yeah, I do find that like students stay quite busy. There is that work hard at being high quality academics, but then there's that play hard that our students are very social and they get to enjoy of being in the city and everything that comes with that.
Yeah, and I love that, not having any academics on the Wednesday night. It's as you mentioned, it doesn't force students, but it gives students the opportunity and really no excuses to not get involved in, all the students that I talk to, whether it's through this podcast or alumni that come back. That's the first thing that they say is go out there, you get involved. That's where you meet your people, that's where you make your friends, that's where you really enjoy those experiences and really helps you settle in and become more engaged in the school.
Yeah, and I found with my experience that I had different communities. I had my academic community, my classmates, and the UK being a cohort model where you're kind of studying the same units together, you move with those students, but then you'll have your community in residence or accommodations. So whoever is your flatmate or whoever lives next door to you. But then through clubs and societies, that's where you will meet people from all backgrounds, from all different interests that maybe you wouldn't naturally bump into. So it's one of the best ways to kind of round out that experience. And it's a whole other community for you to be part of while at the university.
Okay. Now, when students move over there, so they're accepted, they move over, are they living in residence or are they living in the city in apartments? How does that look for students? And do they have a choice?
Yeah, so far students, they do have a choice. So it's something I find typically if you are moving from somewhere around the world to the UK, usually they do live in residence or accommodations for first year at the very least. We're fortunate to be able to guarantee that for students as long as they apply by the deadline. And then the offers that we have, I find the UK standard is typically you don't have a roommate, so it's a single style room. So you have that comfort and personal space. There are options to have a roommate if that's something that either you want or from a budget perspective, having a roommate can be a bit more affordable. But even when it comes to the offerings for Bristol, so we've got being a city campus, you can be in the heart of the city in the downtown area. And living in these not quite high rises, but living in these more like condo type buildings that are just student accommodations. And then we've got what would feel more like when you picture residence or accommodations, where they're more of a community setting of just students. We have that as well, and that's just off the campus. That's about usually students would take the bus in if they're staying there. We call it the village, East Village. It is, but it is where it's only students living there. Some of the recreation facilities are there. So I find when students choose Bristol, they do have to do a little bit of work to decide what type of vibe or what type of environment fits for me. Do I want the shortest walk to class and to be basically in an academic building? Do I want to be 10, 15-minute walk away, but in the downtown of the city? Or do I want to be in the village, which is only students that live there, but it's a bit further from campus. So there's brand new, shiny structures. And then there's places like Goldeney Hall on campus, which is this like secret garden, beautiful. Like it feels like you've just stepped off a movie set in the sense of like the history and the architecture there. And so usually our students, they have to do a little bit of work to decide because it's not just these massive buildings. It's all these different unique structures. The other thing to flag for students is the meal plans and how you eat while in the UK. We say catered or self catered, and that's a decision to make in accommodations because if you choose self catered, which means you're making your own meals. The accommodation options vary slightly because those self-catered students, they need cooking facilities. Where the catered students, they have a meal plan. It is a card that they can tap on campus to get their meals. And then select restaurants in the city actually take the card as well. So you're not limited just to university offerings, as you can actually eat at some of the local restaurants using your university card.
Okay, that's great. I only have a few more questions here. What would be one of the things that either students or parents misunderstand about Bristol, and or what do they find most surprising once they arrive?
Ooh, that is a good question. I find like so I've been fortunate to work in international education in a few different spaces, and I find because Bristol's name recognition. Sometimes we joke it's because our football or soccer team is not in the Prem that folks don't always know where we are. Yet we're the eighth largest city in the UK, so it's a bit of an interesting dynamic for me that I think a lot of people that they know London, maybe they know Scotland, but then the rest of the UK not everybody's always familiar with. And then from a UK perspective, Bristol is known to be one of the top universities. So it's an interesting experience where you have students that they're not familiar and they don't know the city. And then from a British experience, they're like, how do you not know this place? So maybe I like to think it's a very well kept secret, and maybe that means I'm not doing my job because it is a secret. But it is just a really cool, fun space. And I think when students study there, either for study abroad or for their full degree studies, they really come to appreciate it could be a really good fit because for some students, one of the biggest cities in the world is not always the best environment for some students. For some, it is. But to have that comfort of the safety while having a really strong academic community where you're not taken away from industry, you're not taken away from some of the cool things and innovation that are happening in the city or the employability opportunities. You still get all of that while living in what is, I guess you'd call it a university city, a city that is known for that. So I think that surprises students quite a bit when they visit. The thing that they definitely should know is that our one campus, Clifton, is the main campus. It is on a hill, and nobody told me my first time going there of how steep that hill is. So I think that surprises people quite a bit. Like you'll have strong calves, you'll be walking a lot of times. So I think that surprises people that if you've never been to the UK before, you show up in Bristol, and I showed up with my luggage, all of my bags at the bus stop, and then I had to go right up that hill with all my bags. I was not prepared for that. So that's one thing to look out for.
Okay, so make sure you show up with the right shoes to walk up
Yes.
those hills.
Everybody has runners or sneakers. Like that's the standard is that we don't wear nice dress shoes because you've got to have the footwear to be able to manage the city.
Okay. If students or families have questions about Bristol, who and how do they reach out to?
Yeah, and I'm always happy to connect with students and share experiences and help connect them with current students or faculty members. We are fortunate to have a small team that supports students from North America, so Canada, US. So it's Americas-office at bristol.ac.uk or just myself. So Travis.Westlake at bristol.ac.uk. And even if somebody's listened to this from somewhere else in the world and we're not the contact, we do have an international office email, but I'm always happy for someone to send me a message and then I can reconnect them if they're from another region of the world or if they're asking questions that I don't know the answer to. We're pretty collegial that we're happy to help students navigate the process. And sometimes we also understand it's not always Bristol. So I do get a lot of questions about maybe a different university, and that's fine because we can always help get you in contact with that individual at that university because we just want to see more students just understand the value and what's possible with the UK, whether we offer the thing that you're looking for or if it maybe is down the road, we can always refer you to our colleagues.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And then final question. Is there anything that didn't come up in our conversation that you wanted to touch on or that you wish I would have asked?
Hmm. So one thing Bristol's been recognized for recently, we are outside of London. We're ranked third for innovation. So it's this I find it's very strange for education that is making this transition of how do we work with employers, but how do we even just create the things that we're going to use tomorrow? So Bristol is not just a fun, creative city; is that we're actually known as one of the best places for incubators or for startups, and that innovation lens I think is being applied across the university, which just makes it very fun and interesting. Where our new campus facility that's opening up is in the heart of the innovation district and we've got students that are we're next door to Artemin Studios, which is where Wallace and Gromit, the animated film, where that comes from. We're one of the UNESCO cities of films. We're kind of green Hollywood for sustainability, and like the BBC that they've got a space here for the environment. So it's just I think that throws students off. They're like, from a city of this size, how do you have so much going on with the innovation, with the UNESCO City of Film, with the sustainability, that it's for many students, it's like, doesn't really matter what you're looking for. We're probably very good at it. We probably have it. And there's only a few spaces where I'm like, oh, sorry, we don't have architecture or we don't have nursing. But for the most part, there's just these like little threads that pop up that I could see working really well for students. So I think that innovation piece of what a spin out is in the UK and how our students, our researchers are creating companies that are some of the biggest companies now in the world that people, some of the tech unicorns, actually call Bristol home.
Okay. And that's so important for students, especially not only with the return on investment, but those opportunities. The innovation is huge. Travis, thank you so much for your time today and all this great information and insights. And for our listeners, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. And hopefully folks find it interesting, but I really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about Bristol.
Yes. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out. And Travis, we'll talk to you later.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Top Shelf EDU, your inside look at the university experience. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone exploring their path to higher education. We'll be back with more insights, stories, and advice to help you navigate your journey. See you next time.